In this third video for the classroom setup, first I'm going to demonstrate the steps required to build and configure the Tivoli Storage Manager server platform. Then I'll show you how to install the TSM server software and verify that everything is working as expected. Here we are again in vCloud Director working with the vApp that we are building for this class. The first thing I need to do is add a Windows 2008 server machine to the vApp. Now if you have an existing baseline Windows 2008 VM in your catalog, you can use that as long as you make all the necessary modifications so that it matches the VM that I'm building from scratch here. So I'm adding a new virtual machine. I've given it a name, TSM1, selected the operating system, and this machine requires 2 CPUs. I'm going to give it 16 gigs of RAM, and the hard drive is going to be 128 gigabytes. And after we build this machine, we will add some more drives to it that TSM requires. Okay, so we've added the machine. It'll take a minute for that to be added to the vApp, and here we are. We can see our machine. It's powered off. So let's select this and select Properties. Again, you can see the virtual machine name. We'll select the Hardware tab. 2 CPUs, 16 gigs, that's what we needed, and we've got 1 disk drive. So let's go ahead and add the additional drives that we need. So we're going to need a total of 6 disks. The first one's already done, 128 gigabytes, and now we need to add 5 more, and each of these will be 8 gigs. Later on, after you've installed the operating system, you'll have to use Disk Manager to initialize these disks and format the partitions. Okay, so now we've got our drives added. Let's scroll down and check our networking. So this is going to be the 63 net that we constructed in the earlier video. We're going to use manual IP addressing and the IP address that you see here. All of this looks fine, so I'll click OK. And it updated the machine. So the next thing we need to do is install the operating system. We'll do that by inserting the CD, DVD from the catalog. Need to identify the ISO image. Windows Server 2008, that's the one we want, so we'll insert that. And now we'll power on this machine. And when we open the console, we see that we are in the Install Windows wizard. Click Install Now. Accept the license terms. We'll select Custom here because we want to do a fresh install. And of course we want to use disk 0 for the operating system. And again, this is just a typical install of a Windows 2008 server machine. Nothing special about any of this. Windows needs to restart, so we'll do that. And now it's completing the installation. Restarts again. And then I'll log on using the password that's supplied in the Lab Setup Guide companion document. The first time we log in after installing the operating system, the initial configuration tasks window is displayed, but I'm not ready to do that yet. So I'm going to minimize that. I'm going to minimize the console. And back in the vApp, I'm going to select the machine and right-click on that, and I'll choose Install VMware Tools. Then when I return to the console, we should be ready to launch it, and there's the autoplay, so we'll go ahead and install VMware Tools. And nothing special here, just select all the defaults here. Typical installation, install. And I'm doing this first because it just makes the mouse behave a little better and makes for a more pleasant experience. Have to restart the machine again. And then I will log in again. The initial configuration tasks window opens again, but I can avoid an additional restart if I wait to do that. I want to initialize and format the other disks that I added earlier, so I'll open the Server Manager window and find the Disk Management tool. Disk Management has already selected all the disks that need to be initialized, so I'll accept that and complete that step. And now for each of these 5 disks, I'll create a new volume on the partition, accept the default drive letter and volume size. The Quick Format option is selected. And for each of these, I'll use the disk number for the volume label. So disk 1 is labeled disk 1, disk 2 is labeled disk 2, and so on. And when this is done, I can close the Server Manager window and return to the initial configuration tasks window. So the first task I want to do here is change the computer name and domain. So this computer, the description is TSM1. I want the computer name to also be TSM1, so I'll make that change. Don't want to restart yet. It's just a warning. And I missed a step here. I need to go back and change the domain. And our DNS suffix is going to be enablement.ibm.lab. Okay, now that I've got that done correctly, I can click OK. Still not ready to restart, but I can apply these changes, and I'll tell this that I want to restart later. And now we can configure our networking. So here's our network interface. I'll choose Properties here. First thing I'll do is disable IPv6. Then I'll select IPv4 and click Properties to set the IP address. 192.168.63, and this machine is 4. Subnet mask and the default gateway, I'll provide that. I can use the same IP for the DNS server because nothing's really going to be routed during this lab exercises. This all looks fine, so I can close this. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is configure Windows Firewall. For the lab environment, I want to go ahead and turn off the firewall just so we don't have any issues when we start the lab exercises. So I'll turn this off, both places that you see there. Still not ready to restart. I'm going to go back to Server Manager. I want to disable Internet Explorer Enhanced Security Configuration. So I'll turn both of these off for administrators and users. I'll take a minute here to talk about Windows activation. After you enter the product key, you can use the toll-free number to activate Windows using a telephone, and that might just be the easiest way to do that. The other option is to add another network to your vApp. Configure the network adapter in this VM to access the internet and then use the online activation method. Of course, if you use that second option, you'll need to remember to undo those changes and make sure this VM is configured the way I've demonstrated here. Now that Windows has been activated, I'll make the selection to not display the Server Manager window at logon, and I'll close the window. To simplify the lab setup, we're not using a DNS server, so I'll edit the hosts file to sort of stack the deck in our favor and ensure that all three VMs can communicate using their host names. And I need to remember to save the hosts file before I close it. And finally, I'm ready to restart this machine. You can take the time to disable the shutdown event tracker, but it's not a big deal, so I'm not going to bother doing that. At this point, I've built and configured the Windows 2008 server platform, and that concludes the first part of this video. The next thing we need to do is install and configure the Tivoli Storage Manager server product. But before I start that, I'll take a minute to talk about our lab environment. If you recall from the first video in this series, we are going to need a second Windows 2008 virtual machine, which will be the vCenter server platform. In the final video in this series, I'll show you how to build that virtual machine from scratch. But of course, you can save some time by simply cloning the TSM1 VM at this point and making the appropriate modifications to the hardware. Just remember to shut down the TSM1 VM before you clone it if you choose to do that. You'll also want to review the lab setup guide document and the final video to make the hardware modifications and complete the configuration. Also, don't forget to return to this point and complete the TSM server installation and configuration tasks. Before I install the Tivoli Storage Manager server code, I need to open the Local Security Policy Management tool. Locate the Run All Administrators and Admin Approval Node policy and disable it. And then I need to restart this machine once again. So after I log in, I'm going to open Windows Explorer and navigate to the Classroom Setup folder and launch the IBM Installation Manager. On this page, we want to select the first, second, and fourth packages to install. So I'll clear the others. I accept the license agreement on this page, and I will also accept the default locations on this page. I'll review the packages that will be installed, and I need to select the IBM Tivoli Storage Manager Extended Edition here, accept the license agreement on this page, and I'm ready to click Install and begin the process. So I'll observe the progress of the installation here. This will take about 5 minutes in real life, and click Finish when the installation has completed. This next section will be a little easier to understand if I take a minute to explain what's going to happen before I show it to you. Before I can configure the TSM server instance, I need to create an account for the TSM database administrator. I also need to create the folders for the TSM active log, archive log, and database directory. Now, those folders need to be owned by the database admin account, so I'll log on as that user to create those folders, and then I'll be ready to configure the TSM server instance. I'll start by opening a command prompt window, and I'll create the DB2 admin1 account and specify a password. This is the TSM database admin. I'll add the DB admin account to the administrators group. Then I'll create a DB admin group and add the DB admin account to it. and then a DB users group and add the DB admin account to it as well. And I'll point out that the commands that you see me enter here might be easier to follow using the Lab Setup Guide companion document. So now I'm going to log off, and then I'll log back in using the DB2User1 account. I'll open a command prompt window, and I'll create the folders that are needed for the TSM server instance. Now I'm ready to configure the TSM server instance. So from the Start button, I'll select All Programs, open the Tivoli Storage Manager folder, and launch the configuration wizard. Select the language that I want to use, and on the introduction page, I'll click Next to continue. Here I'll supply the user ID, DB2User1, and the password, which again you'll find that in the Lab Setup Guide companion document. Here I'll select the default location for the instance directory and confirm that I want that to be created. I'll select the database directories are listed below option and supply that value here. Now I'll reduce the active log size to 2 gigabytes for our laboratory environment. Supply the location of the active log directory and the location of the archive log directory. I'm going to change the server name to Server 1. And now I need to supply the administrator credentials. And again, you'll find the password in the Lab Setup Guide companion document. On the server communication page, I'll select the option to enable shared memory communication. Then I'll review the configuration summary and start the process to configure the instance. When the configuration is complete, I'll click Done to close the configuration wizard. So that completes the installation of the Tivoli Storage Manager server and configuration of the server instance. Next, I'll install the TSM client and administrative command line interface. This will let me verify that the TSM server is working as expected. I'll navigate to the location of the TSM client code and launch the setup wizard. Select the option to install products and select the TSM Backup Archive client. There are some prerequisite packages that need to be installed, so I'll click Install, accept the license terms, and click Finish when that process is complete. Now the wizard begins installing the TSM client. I'll accept the default destination folder, and on the Setup Type window, I'll select Custom, and make the selection to install the Admin Client command line interface. Wait for the installation process to complete, and click Finish. Now I'll return to the main menu and close the installation wizard. Next, I need to create the client options file. So I'll navigate to the Program Files, Tivoli, TSM, VA Client folder and create a new text file named dsm.opt. I need to remember to change the extension from txt to opt, and then I'll edit the file using Notepad. And once again, I'll point out that some of this detail may be easier to follow using the Classroom Setup companion document. I need to add the 4 lines of text that you see here, and then save the file. Now, from the Start button, I'll select All Programs, open the Tivoli Storage Manager folder, and launch the administrative command line. So here's the moment of truth where we'll see if I did everything correctly. I'll log in using the admin1 user ID and password. This all looks good, so I'll enter the query status command and press enter a few times to review the status, and I'm happy to see that all of that looks normal. So now I'll enter the command to register the client node, and then enter the query node command to verify it. Now I will enter quit to close the admin interface, and I will close the TSM1 console window. At this point, I've created the TSM1 virtual machine, installed the TSM server, configured the server instance, installed the TSM client and administrative command line, verified the TSM is working as it should, and registered the client node. So with all of those tasks accomplished, this video is completed.